Is my voice coming all right? Okay. Hello, everyone. I am Nusret, and I will be talking about accountable safety for rollups. The title is a bit different from the title you might see on the schedule because I decided to focus on a specific aspect of the paper that I think is more relevant to the current discourse. This is joint work with John Adler, Mustafa Al-Bassam, Ismail Kofi, Nima Waziri, and my advisor, David Che. Okay, I know that everyone is excited to go to the party afterwards, so I just decided to include a key takeaway slides in case you need to queue up in front of Noah. So the first key takeaway is security of rollups has typically been shown relying on some trust assumptions, such as an honest majority on the parent chain of the rollup. However, in this talk, I would like to get rid of these trust assumptions and attain a trust minimizing notion of safety. Now, trust minimizing means different things to different people, but here what I mean is accountable safety, and I will subsequently define this and define how it applies to rollups. And we will see that to prove accountable safety for rollups, we would need to impose some requirements on the rollup nodes. Namely, they should be validating the rollup state, which the full nodes are already doing most of the time. But now there's an extra requirement, which is checking the data availability, or rather the availability of the parent chain blocks, which is a bit non-traditional, and we will come to that. Okay, so I would like this, before introducing a model for the rollups and show how accountable safety is defined and applies to the rollup domain, I would like to start with some basics, and these basics will be very useful going forward. So what are the requirements in a blockchain protocol? First of all, what is a blockchain protocol? So I would like to think of it as a subset of state machine replication protocols. And in the subset, I'm thinking the transactions are batched into blocks, and these blocks are ordered by a consensus protocol. And there are three requirements on the validators of this blockchain protocol. The first one is consensus. These validators should be imposing a total order across these blocks. The second one is data availability. These validators should ensure that the data within these blocks are available, and any external observer or client will be able to download these transactions if they want to. And the third one is execution. These validators should be executing these transactions and maintaining a state of the world. And typically, this state is represented by succinct commitments, and these commitments are placed on the block headers. They are sometimes called state root. Okay, now we have seen these three features of a blockchain protocol. How does this help us understand what a rollup is? So a rollup is a layer 2 scalability solutions that was proposed for blockchains to increase their throughput scalability. And at the centerpiece of the rollup system is a parent chain. So this parent chain is a blockchain protocol and is responsible for ordering and the availability of the rollup transactions. And it's maintained by a set of nodes called the parent chain validators. And now, besides the parent chain, I would like to conceptualize a rollup as also a rollup chain that runs in parallel to the parent chain. And this rollup chain consists of blocks that are created by sequencers. So now, who are these sequencers? So these sequencers, they receive transactions from the users of the rollup, or sometimes they extract these transactions from this parent chain. They batch these transactions into blocks. And I would like to also give them the task of executing them. I don't know if you guys were in Patrick McCory's talk in the morning. It was a great talk. He had a different set of nodes called executors here, but I will also additionally give these sequences the task of executing the transactions within the rollup blocks and then creating a state commitment after executing these transactions. However, the core idea in the rollup is not to trust the sequencer. So even though the sequencer executes these transactions and obtains a state commitment, these executions will be verified by the observers of the rollup. For instance, the users who might want to withdraw their transactions later on. And these observers come in two varieties. I would like to call them the rollup full nodes. The rollup full nodes download the whole rollup block. Note that this is not the parent chain block. This is just a rollup block. They download the whole rollup block and execute the rollup block. whereas light clients are much lighter. They won't be downloading the rollup blocks or executing all of them. Okay, this is a lot of words on the slide. So how do these come together in a picture? So this is the traditional architecture that is very prevalent in the industry today. I'm allowed to capture it through a picture. So here is our parent chain, and here is our sequencer. So the sequencer creates these rollup blocks and sends them to the parent chain. Now, in many architectures currently being designed or deployed, there is a bridge contract on the parent chain. And this bridge contract, what it does is that upon receiving a rollup block, it validates the state commitment within the rollup block. It might not be doing this by just executing the transactions, calculating the latest state, and obtaining its commitment, but it might be doing it through more lightweight methods, such as fraud proofs or ZK validity proofs, and so on. And if the state is valid, then it will accept the rollup block, and the rollup block will be included within the parent chain. Now, the parent chain is much more than the rollup block. It might have its own transactions that are separate from the rollup transactions. It might have other rollups blocks as well, and other bridge contracts for other rollups. Now, occasionally, this sequencer can be malicious, and it can produce invalid rollup blocks where either the transaction is invalid or the state is invalid. In this case, the bridge contract will reject the block, and this block will not be included as part of the parent chain. And this process continues. Now, how is the rollup chain constructed? So in the case of these traditional rollups that I would like to call enshrined rollups, because in this case, the rollup enshrines a bridge contract on the parent chain as the ground source of truth that would determine what the actual rollup chain is by accepting or rejecting the blocks. Now, and because of this feature, it's very easy to construct the rollup chain. The rollup full nodes will simply download the blocks from the parent chain. They will execute the blocks, and then they will construct the rollup chain. Now, a much more simplified design is called a sovereign rollup. It's basically not adding to the previous slide, but taking stuff away from the previous slide. So in a sovereign rollup, again, we have a parent chain and a sequencer. But in this case, the parent chain does not have any bridge contract. So parent chain simply accepts any rollup block that is sent to it, and if it pays the transaction fees of including data. In this case, of course, there might be invalid rollup blocks that are included as part of the parent chain. But that's OK, because I did not give the parent chain the task of executing rollup blocks. I gave it the task of consensus and data availability. And in this case, the burden of identifying this ST2TX2 block is invalid falls on the rollup full nodes. They will extract these rollup blocks from the parent chain, and you execute these rollup blocks in order that is imposed on the blocks by the parent chain. And then they will realize that ST2 is an invalid state. They will sanitize it. They will get rid of this block, and then they will construct the correct rollup chain. This is the sovereign architecture. And, well, it's called sovereign because now the rollup can choose whatever parent chain it wants to use. There is no bridge contract. OK, how has security been traditionally shown for the rollups? So security for state machine replication consists of two main components. The first one is safety. The second one is liveness. And now I'm focusing on safety here. And traditional safety has been shown relying on some trust assumptions. For instance, the parent chain has honest majority. And of course, for rollups, there are extra requirements because now the validity check for the state is done by the full nodes outside the parent chain. For instance, in optimistic rollup, there is this assumption of network synchrony, the existential honesty assumption on an online watchtower, sometimes the parent chain's liveness, if it's an enshrined rollup, and so on. And in ZK rollups, of course, the proof system should be complete and sound. And, yeah. So, but in this talk, I would like to basically get rid of the trust assumption on the parent chain. So this is the assumption we'll be targeting here. OK, how do we do this? Before I explain how we do this for a rollup, I would like to explain how people have already done it for blockchains, where single monolithic blockchains. So it has been done through this concept of accountable safety. We say that a blockchain protocol satisfies accountable safety with some resilience F if it provides the following guarantees. The first guarantee is whenever there is a safety violation, all observers of the protocol should be able to identify at least F adversarial validators of the blockchain protocol as protocol violators. And the second main requirement is that no honest validator should be identified as a protocol violator. So now, how is this going beyond the traditional way to prove safety? So traditional safety is proven in the following way. You assume there are less than F adversarial validators, and then using this trust assumption, you prove safety. But in this case, indeed, if there are less than F adversarial validators, safety is guaranteed. However, this thing says something more. It says, if there are more than F adversarial validators, and if these people engage in a safety attack, I will be able to provably identify them. I will be able to point them at them, and everyone will believe in me. Now, how is this better than just having a trust assumption? This is better because now, if these people engage in a safety violation, I can prove to everyone they are malicious, and I can have them impose financial punishments on these people. For instance, slashing. Like if you guys were in Vitalik's talk, he was talking about slashing as well. Now I can maybe slash them. And this basically discourages these people from being adversarial and provides a more economic ground for security. Okay, so how does accountable safety work for blockchains? Let's see an example. So these are some examples of accountably safe consensus protocols. So let's consider this a blockchain protocol where these blocks are proposed, and upon gathering, let's say, a two-third pre-commit vote in the case of Tendermint, they get finalized, right? If there are enough people voting for the block becomes finalized. And this enough number, let's say it's two-thirds. Two-thirds of the validators must vote for it. Now, if I have a safety violation, see, there's a fork here, and people are confused about which one is the correct one. This can only happen if both the top blocks and the bottom blocks, both of them have two-thirds of the votes. But in this case, there must be an overlap, right? Like 1/3 of the people must have voted for both the top blocks and the bottom blocks. But this is a protocol violation because the protocol says you cannot simply just vote on conflicting blocks. You can only vote on one block and not conflicting counterparties. So in this case, by looking at the signatures on these blocks, I can identify the malicious parties that have double voted for them. And I can basically prove to everyone that these are malicious because I can show two signatures while I am assuming existential unforgeability, but I can just show these two signatures on these two conflicting blocks by the same party and then prove to you that they are malicious. Now, this is a very oversimplified consensus protocol. If you want to learn the details about how accountable safety works for blockchains, there was a great talk on BFT forensics earlier in SPC, so you can check out that. Okay, so how do we apply this idea to the rollups? Now, this is kind of like a homework assignment. And I will basically highlight the differences from the previous definition to this definition in color red, so it will become much more clear. So the first one is, we are now focused on the rollup chain, so I will concern myself with the rollup chain. So I would say a rollup protocol or system satisfies accountable safety if it satisfies the following guarantees. The first one is, whenever there's a safety violation on the rollup chain, all observers should be able to prove to identify F adversarial parent chain validators as protocol violators. Now, if there's a safety violation on the rollup, I would identify the parent chain validators as malicious. And of course, I should not be identifying any honest parent chain validator. Now, you might ask, why is this a good notion, right? Like, why am I identifying the parent chain validators whenever there is something wrong on the rollup? Why don't I identify like the rollup full nodes or light clients or the sequencer? Like, first of all, these rollup full nodes or light clients they are external observers of the system. So they might not have any stake in the system. Now, the sequencer might be a single entity. It might have like little stake. But now the people who are very much staked in the system are the parent chain validators. They bond money in the parent chain contracts to be able to execute the protocol as validators. So if I can somehow reduce the security to punishment of these validators, then I will be able to claim some economic safety guarantees. That is why I would like to identify the parent chain validators as malicious if something goes wrong on the rollup. Okay, so in the remaining half of the talk, I would like to prove this accountable safety guarantee for the rollups here. But before that, just a quick reminder. So we have seen these properties in the context of a blockchain protocol. Now I would like to basically repeat them in the context of the rollup because they will make understanding proofs much easier. These three properties were consensus, data availability, and execution. And in the rollup system, consensus and data availability were the responsibilities of the parent chain validators, and execution, or verifying the execution, was the responsibility of the rollup full nodes or like clients. And I will basically use the sovereign rollup model because it's much simpler. It doesn't have this bridge contract in the following proof. Okay, for the proof, I will analyze 3 cases of safety violations that happen due to the failures of these 3 properties: consensus, data availability, and execution. Okay, let's first look at consensus. So this is the parent chain, this is the corresponding rollup chain. Now the parent chain grows, so does the rollup chain. Now the consensus was the responsibility of the parent chain. They failed their responsibility. There is a fork on the parent chain with 2 blocks that are both finalized with sufficiently many votes on them. And there's of course a corresponding fork on the rollup chain because the full nodes who are extracting the rollup chain might be confused about which fork of the parent chain they should choose to extract the rollup. Now, this is a safety violation, and my guarantees tell me I should be able to identify the malicious parent chain validators. And indeed, because there is a fork here, I can identify these malicious parent chain validators. If the parent chain provides accountable safety, then I will just look at these 2 blocks. I will look at the double signatures on them and say, hey, these are the malicious guys. So for this case, we are good to go. The second one is execution. So how can a fork happen due to execution on the rollup chain? Now this is the parent chain. And suppose now there's a malicious sequencer who sneaked in an invalid transaction to the parent chain. Note that this does not happen in these traditional rollups because there's a bridge contract gating it, but this could happen in a sovereign rollup. Now in this case, adversary could claim, hey, ST2 prime, TX2 prime is the next correct rollup block because it seems to appear as the next rollup block within the parent chain. But in fact, I wasn't being very truthful here. There will not be any safety violation in this case because the rollup full nodes, they would, upon executing TX2 prime, they will notice that this is an invalid rollup block. So they will not accept the adversary's claim as true. So instead, they will just choose the next valid rollup block as the block to extend the rollup chain. Okay, finally, this is the crux of the matter. We come to data availability. Now, how can a safety violation happen on the rollup chain due to a data availability issue? Let's consider this. This is a parent chain block, but part of its data is hidden. Well, there is a blockchain, there's this block header, and then the part of the block that contains the rollup data is available. It can be downloaded, but the validators are the malicious validators. They keep the part of the block hidden, yet they still voted for this block and make it seem like it's finalized. So this is a typical data availability attack. So in this case, what would happen? So I said before, these rollup full nodes, they download the rollup blocks from the parent chain, but they do not download all of the parent chain blocks. This is too much because it might have blocks from like, I don't know, like 50 different rollups. Why would you do this as a rollup full node? So they would download their block from this parent chain block, and they would think everything is fine because their block is indeed available. They just downloaded it. So now they think this is the correct tip of the chain on the rollup side. But something else happens here. There are indeed people who realize something is wrong in this case because there are people who try to download all of the parent chain blocks and realize that the data is actually hidden. And if adversary persists in this attack, social consensus mechanisms might come to help. So Vitalik was talking about some of these mechanisms. So what might happen is that the community comes together, or let's see, like more than 2/3 of the validators on the parent chain are compromised. They finalized an unavailable block. They don't reveal the data. What to do? Let's kick out these validators. Let's inaugurate a new validator set and bootstrap the chain from the scratch, maybe from the last valid block. So now they indeed do this, and then they restart the chain. But now, as you can see, a late coming rollup full node would think that the bottom one is the correct one. The bottom block on the parent chain is the correct one. So now we observe that there is a disagreement between the rollup full nodes who were earlier in the system and downloaded the block from the unavailable parent chain block, and the later rollup full nodes who downloaded the rollup block from the later parent chain block. Now, at this point, we do not have accountable safety. The reason is these adversarial validators who kept the data hidden initially might reveal it later. So this is the typical fisherman's dilemma. Now, even though there seems to be a fork here, we cannot identify double signatures by malicious validators because the validator set on these two blocks are completely different. So how am I going to provably identify to someone else that these people were malicious, right? Now, it seems like I have failed at my attempt to prove security, accountable safety. It seems like I cannot identify anyone as malicious on the parent chain, even though there was a safety violation on the rollup chain. So am I going to throw my hands off and walk off the stage? No. I will require the rollup full nodes to check the availability of the parent chain blocks before accepting a rollup block from the parent chain block. So what I would do is that at this stage, I do not want the rollup full nodes to accept ST2 prime, TX2 prime as a valid rollup block, because they should be checking the availability of the corresponding parent chain block, and upon noticing that the data is not available, they should not download this block and add it to their rollup chain. But now I'm contradicting with myself, right? I have previously claimed these rollup full nodes, they cannot download the whole parent chain block. And if they cannot download the whole parent chain block, how am I going to know that data is not there? So this brings us to the punchline, which is checking for data availability. So the rollup nodes must check the availability of the parent chain blocks to attain an accountable notion of safety. However, they cannot download the full rollup block, full parent chain block. So what would they do? They would rely on something called a new holy grail in the blockchain space called data availability sampling. And there are some examples of data availability sampling protocols here. So they have been developed based on erasure codes or error correcting codes, such as Reed-Solomon codes, LDPC codes, and KZG polynomial commitments. This is currently being implemented by many different blockchains, and it's an area that still requires a lot of research. But yeah, so this is currently the solution that we would need to ensure accountable safety for rollups. And that brings me to the final theorem of this talk. So the rollup satisfies accountable safety with resilience F for rollup full nodes if the parent chain satisfies accountable safety, and the rollup full nodes can somehow check the availability of the parent chain blocks, for instance, through this data availability sampling methods. And I haven't talked much about the light clients because there are some additional requirements on them, but the theorem is very similar for them, except that I also require, now in the case of light clients, because the light client doesn't download the full rollup block, it would need to somehow validate its state through some external mechanisms, maybe through the help of fraud proofs or ZK validity proofs. Yeah, and this is indeed what happens. The rollup light clients, they only download the headers of the rollup blocks that contain a state commitment, and they validate the rollup blocks through the help of some fraud proofs or validity proofs created by the rollup full nodes to extract the correct rollup header chain. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Great. We have time for questions. Any questions? So does the same result apply also for the enshrined rollups, or is this?
Yes, it also applies. Actually, proving the result is simpler in that case because there is a bridge contract which already weeds out invalid blocks from the parent chain.
Is there any difference between enshrined and sovereign? Like, is there any benefit to one versus the other?
Yes, there are differences. Well, in the case of sovereign rollups, the rollup has more freedom it can choose between different parent chains. It doesn't have a contract that it enshrines. But it's much harder to support light clients in the case of sovereign rollups because of the lack of execution on the parent chain. But that is a separate matter. Like there are some works I have actually worked on, like these light clients for lazy blockchains and so on.
Yeah, excellent, great. Any other questions? Okay, looks like everybody's maybe tired or happy, or this was a fantastically clear talk. So everybody got all the points. Fantastic. All right, so let's thank Nusrat one more time. Thank you. Okay, guys, so this brings us to the end of the SBC conference. This was our last session. So I hope everybody enjoyed the conference. Thank you all for coming. And, you know, as long as you keep coming, we'll keep running the conference. So I really look forward to seeing you next year. So long, everyone.